I swear, that day started so ordinary it almost feels like the universe was playing a joke on me. I woke up thinking about emails, laundry, and what to cook for dinner, not about my marriage falling apart in a lobby. Then, while I was scrolling my phone during a coffee break, I saw a post about keeping the spark alive, and it hit me. I thought, why not surprise Brendan at work and drag him out for lunch like we used to when we were dating? It felt cute, harmless, almost romantic, you know? So I grabbed my keys, checked my lipstick in the mirror, and told myself I was being a good wife, not a suspicious one. On the way there, I was actually smiling like a teenager with a crush. The city was loud and busy, cars honking, people rushing, but inside my head it was just me and this little plan. There was a new restaurant near his office I'd been dying to try, all exposed brick and cozy lighting from the photos online. I imagined us laughing over pasta, him saying how happy he was that I'd shown up out of nowhere. In my mind, I was already replaying every detail so I could tell people later how spontaneity still works. Funny, right? How we build entire fantasies on top of people who are busy building something else behind our backs. When I walked into his building, the air conditioning hit me first, that artificial cold that smells like coffee and printer ink. The lobby was polished and quiet, just the faint clicking of a keyboard and the soft buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Behind the front desk, the receptionist was focused on her screen, tapping away, a half-empty mug by her hand. I straightened my blouse, took a breath, and walked up with that polite, almost shy smile wives use when they're proud of their husbands. I told her I was there to see Brendan, and asked if she could please call him down for a quick lunch. She glanced at me, then at the monitor. And that's when her expression changed. Just a little, but enough to make my stomach tighten. She tilted her head, almost apologetically, like she already knew she was about to say something odd. Then she let out this tiny laugh, not mocking, just confused, and said, "We do have a Brendan here, but he's not married." For a second, I thought I misheard her. I actually blinked and leaned in, like maybe the problem was my ears, not her words. My heart dropped so fast it felt like the floor gave out underneath me, but I tried to keep my face neutral. I told her as calmly as I could that I was his wife, and maybe she was looking at the wrong Brendan. But she frowned, double-checked the screen, and repeated it slowly, like she wanted to make sure I understood. "No, it says single." You know that moment when your brain tries to process something, but your emotions get there first? It was like that. A burst of confusion, humiliation, then anger, all tangled together so tightly I couldn't breathe. My hands went cold, and I could hear my own pulse in my ears, loud and sharp like a warning bell. I kept waiting for her to add, "Oops, my mistake," or "Let me check again," or literally anything that made sense. But she was already moving on, asking if I needed anything else, completely unaware she had just broken a marriage in one sentence. I forced a smile. I thanked her. Imagine thanking the person who just cracked your world open, and took a small step back. I didn't leave, though. Something in me refused to go. That little corner of instinct every woman has, the one that whispers when something isn't right, told me to stay put. I sat down on one of those stiff lobby chairs, pretending to check my phone, but really I was replaying everything in my head. Why would he put single on work documents? What kind of person does that? What kind of husband needs a double life at the office? The humiliation was still swirling, but beneath it there was something new forming. Something sharp, something quiet. I decided I wasn't leaving until I saw him with my own eyes, until he had to look at me and explain whatever this was. I kept my eyes glued to the elevator, pretending I was just another visitor waiting for someone, even though my chest felt tight enough to crack. Every time the doors slid open, I straightened a little, hoping and dreading that it would be him stepping out. My mind kept drifting to memories I hadn't thought about in years. The way he used to text me good mornings, how he once drove across town just to bring me soup when I was sick. Back then, he made me feel chosen, treasured even. And now here I was, sitting under cold fluorescent lights, being erased by the same man. It's strange how betrayal doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes gently, spoken by a stranger behind a desk. And as I stared at the elevator, I felt this hollow ache spreading, like something inside me was quietly unraveling thread by thread. After what felt like forever, the receptionist picked up the phone and said, "Brendan, someone's here to see you." Her tone was different this time. Cautious, maybe curious. And I didn't know if that made it better or worse. My hands were trembling, so I pressed them between my knees, trying to steady myself before he appeared. I kept imagining how he would react, surprised, annoyed, maybe even happy if I was still living in some fantasy. But deep down, there was a pit forming in my stomach, a heavy certainty that whatever came next wouldn't feel right. Still, I lifted my chin and reminded myself I had every right to be there, even if he had pretended otherwise. Then the elevator chimed, doors sliding open in slow, dramatic silence. Almost mocking, honestly. Brendan stepped out, looking sharp in his work clothes, but there was something in his face I caught instantly. Alarm. Not delight, not affection, just plain, unmistakable alarm. The kind that says, without words, "You weren't supposed to be here." And right then, before he even reached me, before he even opened his mouth, I felt something shift deep inside me. A quiet, steadying force that told me this story was about to twist in a way I could never take back. The moment Brendan spotted me, his whole body stiffened like I'd just caught him doing something he shouldn't. He tried to smooth his expression into something neutral, but it was too late. I'd already seen the flicker of panic in his eyes. He walked toward me with that tight, forced smile he uses when he's trying to control a situation, not when he's happy to see me. Before I could even say, "Hi," he asked why I had shown up without warning, as if my presence needed scheduling permission. His voice was low, tense, the kind men use when they're more worried about who's watching than about the woman in front of them. And I swear, the way he looked over his shoulder made my skin crawl, like he was checking if anyone else had noticed I existed. I told him I came to take him out for lunch at the new place around the corner, tried to make my voice light, calm, normal, but he didn't even smile. He just sighed, pinched the bridge of his nose, and said I was messing with his schedule today. That little sentence hit me harder than I expected, like suddenly I wasn't a wife, I was a disruption. I said the receptionist told me he wasn't married, and I swear he flinched, barely but enough. He let out this awkward laugh, the fake kind, and said I must have misunderstood or heard wrong, that people make mistakes all the time. But he wouldn't look me in the eye while saying it, and that tiny detail cut deeper than anything else. The lobby felt even colder after that, like the air itself was reacting to the lie hanging between us. I watched his jaw tighten, watched him tap his fingers against his thigh, a habit he has when he's lying. He said he had a lunch meeting he couldn't skip, even though he didn't have his laptop or any files with him. He kept glancing at the elevator, not at me, like I was an obstacle in the way of wherever he was really going. The disappointment settled heavy in my chest, thick and suffocating, but underneath it, something sharper started to grow. Because the truth is, a woman knows when she's being lied to, even if the lie comes wrapped in a smile. I tried to steady myself, to breathe, to not let the humiliation swallow me whole right there in front of him. So I asked, gently, if we could at least walk outside together for a minute, talk, clear the air, something. But he shook his head so quickly it felt rehearsed, saying he was already running late, that everything today was just badly timed. Badly timed, like my existence was an interruption he hadn't penciled in. He kept insisting the receptionist probably mixed him up with someone else, but the way he rushed through the explanation made it feel like he was trying to outrun the truth. And each word he threw at me was like another little nudge pushing me out of whatever life I thought we had. I told him it wasn't a mix-up, that she said it twice, even after checking the system again. That's when he snapped, not loudly, but sharply, saying I was overthinking, that I always jumped to conclusions. Which was hilarious, considering I wasn't the one pretending to be single on legal paperwork. The more he talked, the more detached his voice sounded, like he was talking to a coworker, not his wife. He even glanced at the receptionist like he wanted her to stop listening, which only made my suspicion flare hotter. And when he finally looked at me, really looked, there was no warmth, just irritation fighting to stay hidden. I didn't push further, I didn't cry or beg or argue. I just stood there, nodding slowly as if his excuses made sense. Because in that moment, something inside me clicked into place, a quiet certainty that whatever he was hiding was bigger than a stupid lunch meeting. I asked one last time if he truly couldn't join me, hoping he'd choose the truth over whatever game he was playing. But he said he had to go, kissed my cheek in a rushed, obligatory way, and muttered that we'd talk later tonight. Then he turned around and walked toward the exit, not even checking if I was following. And as I watched him leave, a thought hit me so clearly it felt like someone whispered it in my ear. Follow him. The moment he walked out of the building, something in me rose up. Not rage, not panic, but this cold, focused clarity. I waited a few seconds before standing, pretending to check my messages so the receptionist wouldn't think anything was wrong. Inside, though, my nerves were buzzing, like every instinct I had was suddenly wide awake and pointing in one direction. Go. I slipped out of the lobby as casually as I could, keeping just enough distance so he wouldn't hear my steps behind him. He didn't look back once, not once, which told me everything I needed to know about where his mind was. A man hiding nothing always glances over his shoulder. A man hiding everything never does. Outside, the sun was bright, the streets crowded, the midday noise swirling around me, but I barely felt any of it. All I could see was his back moving quickly down the sidewalk, weaving through people like he had somewhere urgent to be. No laptop bag, no files, no sign of a meeting, just him checking his watch again and again, his pace a little too fast. My heart thudded hard, but not from fear, from a rising, stubborn determination to finally see what lived behind all his excuses. I followed him past a bakery, past a bookstore, past the street where most office workers turned for the business district. But he didn't turn there. He crossed the street instead, heading straight toward the area with cafes and small, intimate restaurants. When he stopped in front of a place I'd never seen before, quiet, charming, the kind of spot couples choose for privacy, my breath caught. He looked around, nervous, smoothing his shirt, running his fingers through his hair the way he does when he wants to impress someone. Then he went inside. No hesitation, no glance behind him. And I swear, standing there on that sidewalk, it felt like my entire world narrowed down to one sharp, undeniable truth. Whatever he was doing, whoever he was meeting, it wasn't work-related, not even close. So I pulled the door open too, slowly, silently, ready to see the version of my husband he clearly didn't want me to know. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me like a wall. Warm lighting, soft music, tables tucked close enough for whispers, but far enough for secrets. It wasn't a place for business lunches. It was a place for intimacy. Quiet corners, shared desserts, stolen moments. I kept to the side, pretending to look at the menu board near the entrance, even though the words were just a blur in front of me. My eyes scanned the room until they found him, Brendan, already seated at a small table near the back, his posture tense but expectant. He was facing the door, which made me freeze for a second, terrified he'd see me. But he wasn't looking around. He was too focused on the empty chair across from him, waiting for someone. I chose a spot behind a pillar, just far enough to stay hidden, but close enough to watch. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought someone else might hear it, but I kept still, like I'd turned into stone. There was this thick, sinking feeling spreading through my chest, the kind that tells you you're about to witness something you can never unsee. I kept telling myself I was wrong, that maybe he really did have a meeting, maybe this was just a weird coincidence. But then the door opened again, letting in a rush of light from outside, and a woman walked in, heading straight for him with the kind of confidence that comes from familiarity. She wasn't overly glamorous or flashy, just effortlessly put together, the kind of beauty that doesn't need noise to be noticed. Her steps were relaxed, her smile easy, and the moment Brendan saw her, he softened in a way he hadn't softened for me in a long, long time. His shoulders lowered, his jaw unclenched, and he stood up slightly to greet her. She touched his arm before sitting, the way you touch something that already belongs to you. And that tiny gesture sliced through me so cleanly it almost took my breath away. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught enough. Their voices low, their faces close, the kind of closeness that doesn't happen overnight. She laughed at something he said, a soft, familiar laugh, and he leaned in like he was sharing a secret meant only for her. My stomach twisted so hard I had to grip the side of the pillar to steady myself, nails digging into the wood. It wasn't just the sight of them together. It was the ease, the routine. They didn't look like two people sneaking around for the thrill. They looked like two people who'd been doing this for a while. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. The thought that he'd given another woman the version of him I hadn't seen in ages. Then the conversation shifted, their voices lowering even more. But a few phrases floated to me clearly enough to make my pulse spike. The woman said, almost teasing, "Your receptionist told me someone came asking for your wife today." My blood went cold. She knew about me. She knew I existed. But it was Brendan's response that nearly made my knees buckle. He told her not to worry, that he was handling it, that I wouldn't be a problem, like I was some loose end he needed to tie up quietly. Hearing him talk about me like that, it felt like being erased in real time. She rested her hand on his, gently, almost sympathetically, as if she understood the burden of the lie he was carrying. She said something about not wanting drama, and he assured her everything was under control. Under control. The words echoed in my head, heavy and bitter, because I realized he wasn't just cheating. He was constructing an entire life, a second identity, and I wasn't part of it. Not publicly, not proudly, not truthfully. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. I stepped back a little, just enough to breathe without choking on the bitterness filling my throat. My eyes were burning, but not from tears, from a heat I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't even jealousy. It was clarity, sharp as glass, settling into place piece by piece. Watching them together, hearing him dismiss me like an inconvenience, something inside me shifted from wounded to awake. I realized I wasn't standing there to fall apart. I was standing there to finally see the truth without his sugar-coated excuses. Brendan reached across the table and brushed a stray hair behind her ear, and she smiled like that touch belonged to her. And maybe it did. But what struck me hardest was how natural it felt for him. No guilt, no hesitation. Just a man living a life he had crafted carefully enough to exclude me where it mattered. I felt my heartbeat slow, becoming steady, strong, almost eerily calm. Because suddenly, I wasn't desperate for explanations anymore. I was collecting evidence without even meaning to. Every gesture, every look, every word became another brick in the foundation of something new forming inside me. I watched for one more minute, just long enough to make sure I wouldn't doubt myself later. Then I turned around and walked out of that restaurant with my spine straighter than when I walked in. The sunlight hit me on the sidewalk, warm and honest in a way Brendan had not been in years. And as I stood there, letting that warmth sink into my skin, a decision crystallized so clearly in my mind, it felt like a whisper from my own future. This wasn't going to break me. It was going to transform me. And whatever came next, it would be on my terms, not his. The walk home felt strangely quiet, even though the city around me was buzzing with people and traffic and life. It was like someone had turned down the volume of the world so I could finally hear my own thoughts clearly. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I think I'd crossed some invisible line between pain and purpose. By the time I unlocked my front door, I already knew I wasn't going to yell at him or confront him in a dramatic scene. No, Brendan thrived in chaos. Chaos gave him room to twist things, to make me doubt myself. So instead, I walked into our house with this eerie, focused calm, like I was stepping into a puzzle I already knew how to solve. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The couch where we watched movies, the candles I chose, the framed photos of vacations he barely remembered. But in the quiet of that moment, the house felt like a museum of a life I had been carrying alone. I went straight to the drawer where we kept our documents, pulling out our marriage certificate first, just staring at it for a moment. It was ridiculous, honestly, how a piece of paper could claim something he was denying in public every single day. Then I grabbed our shared bank statements, investment documents, tax information, anything with both our names. A part of me felt like I was moving through someone else's life, but another part felt like I was finally reclaiming my own. When I opened my laptop, my hands didn't even shake. I searched for the number of the lawyer my friend had recommended months ago, the one she used in her own divorce. At the time, I saved it thinking, just in case. I never thought I'd actually use it, but as I dialed the number, I realized something. This wasn't an act of revenge. Not yet. It was self-preservation. The kind women choose when they finally understand that silence only protects the wrong person. And when the lawyer answered, I introduced myself with a steady voice, ready to tell a story I never imagined would be mine. The lawyer, a woman with a calm but razor-sharp voice, listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The receptionist, the single status, the lunch, the other woman. There was a moment of silence afterward, not the awkward kind, but the kind where you can practically hear someone thinking. Then she said, very plainly, that what Brendan had done wasn't just immoral, it was legally questionable. Declaring himself single on official employment records, especially while benefiting from a marriage legally recognized, could have serious implications. Hearing that felt like a slap and a lifeline at the same time, painful but grounding. For the first time since the lobby, I felt like I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. She told me to gather proof. Not drama, not accusations, but documents, dates, screenshots, anything showing our marriage and his inconsistent declarations. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, because that part, I could do. I could be methodical. I could be precise. She spoke to me with a respect I hadn't felt from Brendan in years, as if my story mattered, my anger was justified, my confusion valid. And it made me realize how long I'd been living in a fog created by someone who benefited from me doubting myself. By the end of the call, we had a plan. A clear, step-by-step path that didn't involve screaming or begging or trying to force him to see me. It involved me seeing myself and acting accordingly. When I hung up, I sat there in the silence of our living room, surrounded by documents I suddenly saw differently. These weren't just papers. They were leverage, truth, clarity. And in the middle of that thought, my phone buzzed. A message from Brendan. He wrote, "Sorry I snapped earlier. Work's been crazy. We'll talk tonight." Just that, casual, dismissive, like I was a minor inconvenience he remembered between tasks. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then turned the phone face down on the table, refusing to respond. I didn't answer his message, not out of spite, but because something inside me had gone quiet. The part that used to rush to fix things, to smooth tension, to keep the peace. Instead, I stood up and walked through the house slowly, seeing everything with new eyes. His jacket over the chair, his shoes by the door, his half-empty water glass on the counter. All the little traces of a man who had built comfort here while building a whole other identity elsewhere. For years, I'd thought these small domestic details meant stability, partnership, a life shared. But now they looked like evidence of how easily he carried two worlds without letting them collide. A man who could hide a wife at home and hide his single status at work wasn't someone I needed to protect anymore. I gathered every piece of paperwork into neat stacks, labeling them quietly with sticky notes. Marriage certificate, taxes, joint accounts, photos. Each item felt like a puzzle piece falling into its proper place, not to destroy him, but to free myself. And strangely, the more organized I became, the calmer I felt. There was no panic left, no trembling, no second-guessing. Just this steady, grounded certainty that I deserved truth, and if he wouldn't give it, I'd take it without asking. As the afternoon sun shifted across the living room, a single memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought about in years. I saw myself as a child, watching my mother endure silence, excuses, half-truths from the man she loved. She used to say, "Keeping the peace is the price for keeping a family." But sitting there, watching the light move across the stacks of evidence, I realized she'd been wrong. Sometimes keeping the peace means letting go of the war you're pretending isn't happening. And by the time evening shadows crept across the room, I already knew what kind of woman I would be when he walked through that door. Not broken, not desperate, but ready. Brendan walked through the door that evening like nothing was wrong. Jacket slung over his arm, keys jingling, humming some tune like he was the picture of a normal, faithful husband coming home. The moment he saw me sitting at the dining table, though, his humming stopped. He hesitated, just for a second, like he could sense something in the air, something colder, heavier, sharper than anything we'd shared in a long time. But he recovered quickly, offering that tired, performative smile men use when they want to flip a situation before it even starts. He said he'd had a long day, and hoped I wasn't still upset about earlier, like I'd thrown a tantrum over a misplaced sock. The arrogance of that, of assuming my silence was emotional, not intentional, made my heart beat slower, steadier. I asked him to sit, my voice so calm it made him blink. There was no tremor, no anger, just quiet control, and I think that unnerved him more than if I'd screamed. He sat across from me, loosening his tie, already preparing whatever version of the truth he thought I'd swallow. He started talking before I even asked a question, rambling about deadlines, miscommunications, stress, and how everything today had just been bad timing. He said the receptionist must have been confused, that he didn't know why she'd say something so absurd. He said the lunch I interrupted wasn't what I thought. He just needed a break, some space to breathe, nothing dramatic. As he spoke, he kept searching my face for softness, forgiveness, anything he could mold to his advantage. But I just listened, still, composed, with my hands folded neatly on the table. And the longer he talked, the more nervous he became, because he was the only chaotic thing in a room that felt meticulously calm. He tried to reach for my hand, saying he didn't want us to fight, that he hated misunderstandings. But I pulled my hand back gently, not out of anger, but because I wanted him to feel the shift, the distance. That's when his smile faltered, the first tiny crack in his mask. When I finally spoke, my voice was soft, almost too soft, the kind of softness that makes men nervous because it doesn't match the chaos they expect. I reached into the folder beside me and laid our marriage certificate on the table, turning it so he could see his own signature staring back at him. He blinked at it, confused at first, then wary, like he wasn't sure which version of his lies he needed to adjust to fit the moment. Before he could speak, I placed the second document in front of him, the employment form listing his marital status as single. His face drained of color, his mouth opening slightly before he quickly tried to form a smirk, like he could charm his way through a legal contradiction. But his hands betrayed him. They were trembling ever so slightly on the table. He said it was a clerical mistake, that he didn't notice the box was checked as single, that HR probably messed it up. I didn't say a word. I just slid my phone across the table, the photos I'd taken of him having lunch with the other woman clearly visible on the screen. The moment he saw the image, his entire posture collapsed inward, like his spine forgot how to hold him up. He whispered my name like a plea, like I could rescue him from his own choices, like I was the one being unreasonable for documenting the truth. He tried to grab the phone, probably to delete the photos, but I placed my hand over it and said, very quietly, that I'd already backed everything up, including the documents he didn't want anyone to see. He leaned back in his chair like someone had punched the air out of him. Then came the begging, subtle at first, disguised as concern. He said I was overreacting, that I was taking things too far, that I was about to destroy both of our lives over one mistake. Funny how suddenly it was both of our lives, when all day I'd been an inconvenience he didn't even claim. He kept insisting we could fix this, that he would end things, that he'd do whatever I wanted. But every word felt like it was coming from a man desperate to save himself, not us. I let him talk himself in circles, watching every frantic gesture, every desperate attempt to shape the narrative into something less damning. There was a time when his panic would have broken me, when I would have clung to his promises, begged for honesty, tried to rebuild whatever he shattered. But not tonight. Tonight, I just observed him with a clarity so sharp it felt like I was seeing him for the first time. When he finally stopped to breathe, I slid one last envelope across the table, the documents from my lawyer. His face twisted when he saw the letterhead, his voice dropping to a whisper as he asked what I'd done. And I told him calmly that I had simply taken the truth he tried to hide and placed it in the right hands. He reached for my arm, eyes wide, saying I couldn't throw everything away over a misunderstanding. That word, misunderstanding, almost made me laugh. Almost. I pulled my arm back, slowly, deliberately, letting the distance settle between us like a final, silent verdict. Then I explained in that same even tone that he'd been living two lives, one where he played husband at home and one where he played single everywhere else. And the funniest part? He seemed more terrified about the legal consequences than about losing me. He kept shaking his head, saying I was ruining everything he built, as if I was the one who signed forms pretending not to have a wife. I stood up then, feeling taller than I had in years. I told him he needed to pack a bag and leave, that I'd already arranged for the locks to be changed in the morning. His mouth fell open, his voice cracking as he asked where he was supposed to go, what he was supposed to do. I just shrugged, feeling the last thread of emotional attachment snap free inside me. Because for the first time in this entire marriage, his problems weren't mine to solve. And as I walked past him toward the living room, I felt a strange, steady peace settle into my bones, the kind that comes when a woman finally chooses herself.